They didn't just burn my storage, they burned my entire livelihood. It was the middle of November, brutal cold was closing in hard, and my whole herd, my goats, my chickens, they needed feed reserves just to survive the winter. But the Homeowners Association, our local, self-appointed tyrants, decided my working storage barn was too unsightly, so they torched it. Burned it down in the dead of the night. No warning, no remorse, just smoke and ashes. I stood there, watching 4 months of grueling, back-breaking preparation, 200 hay bales, and tons of grain turned to smoldering dust. They called it enforcing regulations, I called it arson. And when their queen told me to stay quiet and accept their fabricated reality, I didn't pick up a phone. I reached for my loaded Remington 870 shotgun. They had no idea that the shotgun was carrying something they never expected, a silent, unblinking witness that would ultimately bring their entire corrupt kingdom crashing down. The stench was what woke me, long before the sun even thought about rising, around 5:47 a.m. The cold air seeping through my bedroom window carried this sickening, heavy smell of burned grain, scorched hay, and something sharp and chemical that absolutely didn't belong anywhere near my land. I grabbed my Remington 870 from beside the bed, the very same shotgun I had grabbed just a few hours earlier, around 2 a.m., when a strange scraping noise had pulled me out of a deep sleep. Back then, I remembered stepping onto the porch, scanning the dark perimeter for coyotes or bobcats, but I saw nothing except the quiet, normal silhouette of my storage barn against the tree-line. The night had been completely still, no movement, no smoke, no sign of any trouble at all. I figured the sound must have been the wind rattling the old fence, and I went back inside, settling back into bed. Now, standing in my doorway 3 hours later, staring at the inferno's aftermath, I understood the terrible, sickening truth. The fire had been started after I went back inside. Someone had been watching. Someone had been calculating. Someone had waited for me to give up looking and retreat back into the house. My storage barn was gone. Just utterly and completely gone. The corrugated metal walls had collapsed inward, steel beams twisted at grotesque angles from heat that must have burned fast and furious. 200 hay bales, 40 bags of precious protein supplement, and a custom feed mixer I had saved 3 grueling years just to purchase. $8,000 worth of equipment, plus 4 months of vital winter preparation, all reduced to ash and warped steel. I walked through the debris slowly, my boots crunching on the still warm remains, forcing myself to look at every single detail, not to mourn the financial loss, but to truly understand. The burn pattern spread outward from the northeast corner, the side facing directly away from my house. Deliberate positioning. Whoever did this knew exactly which angle would hide the initial flames longest from my bedroom window. This was not an accident. This was calculated, premeditated destruction. I knelt there in the debris, and I spotted something critical wedged tightly between a fallen beam and the concrete foundation. A small scrap of black fabric, maybe 2 inches square, partially melted, but instantly recognizable as heavy-duty synthetic material, the kind used in industrial work gloves, the cheap ones you buy for $15 at any hardware store. I didn't own gloves like that. My hands worked only in leather, they always had. I pulled a plastic sandwich bag from my pocket and sealed the fabric inside, the same way I used to document evidence during my years in the army. Old habits that suddenly felt absolutely essential again. Someone had made a mistake, left a damning piece of themselves behind, and that piece was now mine. As I stood up, my grip instinctively tightened on the Remington, and then I noticed something I had nearly forgotten. Mounted right there on the barrel, a small, weatherproof trail camera. A device I had installed 3 months ago, purely to monitor predator activity near my livestock pens. It was motion-activated, infrared-capable, and specifically designed to record anything larger than a rabbit within its field of view. I had removed the memory card 2 nights ago because it was full, intending to review the footage and swap in a fresh one, but I never got around to it, which meant the camera had been running on its internal storage when I stepped outside at 2 a.m. It wouldn't have captured the fire itself from this distance, but it might have recorded whatever I missed in those dark, critical hours. The thought sent a cold spark of absolute determination through my chest, the very first thing resembling hope since I smelled the smoke. Tires crunched on the gravel drive, pulling my attention to the main road. A white SUV bearing the HOA logo rolled slowly up my drive, stopping just past the property marker, as if the driver wanted a clear, safe view before committing further. The door opened, and out stepped our HOA president, Vivian Sterling, dressed in a tailored coat that seemed absurd for 6 o'clock in the morning. Her silver blonde hair pulled into a bun so tight it sharpened every single angle of her face. She walked toward me with measured, calculated steps, phone already in hand, and I caught a glimpse of the screen before she pocketed it. A notification from something called Property Watch, the HOA's automated monitoring service. Of course, she would be the very first to know. Vivian stopped about 10 feet from the wreckage and surveyed the scene with an expression I simply could not read. No shock, no sympathy, nothing that suggested this destruction surprised her in the slightest. She tilted her head slightly, examining the collapsed barn the way someone might inspect a stain on an otherwise clean carpet. "What a terrible accident, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice polished and colder than frozen steel. "I came as soon as the alert came through. Such a shame." She paused, letting her gaze drift across the ash and twisted metal. "Perhaps this is a sign that agricultural operations simply aren't suited for our community. The board would be happy to discuss relocation assistance if you're interested." She smiled then, a thin curve of her lips that never, ever reached her eyes. I said nothing. I just watched her, memorizing every detail of her unnerving composure, and felt the small, reassuring weight of that evidence bag in my pocket. She thought this was over. She had no idea it was just beginning. 1 week after the fire, I walked into the HOA administrative office with a formal request for investigation support. I argued that under our bylaws, the association held responsibility for community security, which should include arson on a member's property. 10 minutes later, Vivian Sterling emerged, still wearing that same cold composure. "Mr. Miller," she said, flipping through my request without reading it. "This appears to be a personal matter. The HOA security provisions apply to common areas only." I pointed out that the fire endangered the entire community, that sparks could have easily spread. She slid the papers back toward me. "File a claim with your insurance company. That's the appropriate channel." 3 brand new violation notices waited in my mailbox when I got home. The first cited my perimeter fence height. The second was a complaint of odor violations from livestock waste, and the third accused me of noise disturbances from agricultural equipment. Each notice carried a heavy fine. All 3 showed filing dates before the fire, yet I had never received them until now. Someone had manufactured a paper trail, creating the appearance of ongoing, escalating violations that justified immediate, harsh action. Payment was due within 14 days. That night, I pulled out the CCNRs, 47 dense pages of legal language. I read every word, searching for weapons. I found the clauses that allowed the board to determine aesthetic violations at its sole discretion, permitted fines to accumulate interest, and authorized liens against properties with unpaid assessments. And the clause that truly chilled me: emergency hearings could be convened with 48 hours notice. They had meticulously built themselves a legal machine for slowly crushing anyone they decided didn't belong. I spent the next 3 days researching state law instead of mourning. What I found changed everything: the Right to Farm Act. It explicitly limited HOA authority over agricultural operations on A1 zone land. My farm was protected. I drafted a formal complaint. The response arrived 2 days later, citing the emergency hearing clause. My hearing was scheduled for Wednesday at 2 p.m., 48 hours from the notice, an emergency session concerning the ongoing agricultural nuisance. They were using their own bylaws to ambush me. I also searched the County Planning Commission's public records portal for any pending development applications. The results were anything but routine. Filed 7 months earlier, a preliminary zoning variance request from Crestview Holdings outlined plans for something called the Cypress Resort and Spa. My 15 acres sat dead center in their acquisition zone, marked in bright yellow as a future Phase 2 expansion. They had simply drawn my land into their corporate vision as if I had already agreed to disappear. I was still processing this discovery when my phone rang. Veronica's number appeared. "Mr. Miller," she said, "one of our property watch alerts flagged unusual activity near your barn the night of the fire. Motion sensor trigger around 2 a.m. I assumed you might have received similar alerts from your own security system. I thought about the trail camera." Just wildlife cameras, I said, my voice carefully neutral. Nothing that covers the barn area. The tension in her voice dissolved into utter satisfaction. She believed her lie had worked. I needed her to keep believing that. I set the phone down. A new email waited at the top. The HOA had filed a lien against my property for unpaid violation assessments totaling $12,400, calculated from the backdated notices. I had 90 days to pay or face foreclosure. Using the escalation clause, the actual amount quickly climbed to $13,600. My savings held $8,200. The math was simple and brutal. They had designed a debt I could never escape. 3 days before the hearing, the insurance company delivered its verdict. My claim was denied pending investigation. The report focused on the 3-hour gap, 2 a.m. to 5:47 a.m., implying they suspected I had started the fire myself. No fire marshal report, no insurance payout. No payout, no funds to fight the lien. The system had locked together perfectly. The rumors found me through silence. At the hardware store, at the gas station, insurance fraud. Burned it himself. The phrases hung in the air. Only someone with knowledge of my denied claim could have spread such specific accusations, and only Vivian, the trusted queen, would be believed. She was using whispers to turn the community against me. I filed a formal request for HOA financial records. What arrived was carefully useless. Photocopied statements too blurred to verify. Scanned meeting minutes degraded beyond legibility. But 3 consecutive pages were missing from the minutes dated 14 months ago, precisely the period when aesthetic regulations were expanded. Then I found the line item, Sterling and Associates. Consulting fee $15,000, repeated quarterly, totaling $60,000 annually. A shell company registered to Vivian Sterling and Trevor Hayes, the vice president who sat beside her. They were funneling homeowner fees into their own pockets. The connection to Crestview Holdings was immediate. Sterling and Associates was registered 3 months after Crestview filed its resort application. Vivian was being paid by the developer to clear obstacles. My farm wasn't a nuisance. It was an obstacle to a business arrangement worth millions. Wednesday arrived cold and gray for the hearing. My outstanding balance was now $14,200. Veronica smiled when I entered. We've also learned that your insurance claim was denied. Meridian/Crestview Development has authorized me to present you with a fair offer. The number on the paper was less than half my land's value. The trap was complete. They just needed me to walk into it. Winter came without mercy. I had rejected Veronica's offer, but the debt kept climbing. The math left me no choice. I called the livestock auction house and arranged to sell most of my herd, 40 goats, 100 chickens. 8 years of building something real, loaded onto trailers and driven away. I kept 5 goats and 20 chickens, enough to maintain legal classification as a working farm. The auction brought $6,200. I wired $5,800 to the HOA, leaving $7,800 still owed and $400 to survive the winter. I called Roger Finch, the fire investigator, and told him about the financial conspiracy. That triggers our conflict of interest protocol, he said. I can be there in 2 hours. I gave him the synthetic glove fabric. But fabric alone won't identify who was here that night, he warned. I need something that puts specific individuals at the scene. That night, I sat at my kitchen table. I removed the internal storage from the trail camera mounted on the Remington 870. The clip timestamped at 1:53 a.m. stopped my breath. 2 figures were moving near the northeast corner of my barn. One figure, tall and thin with nervous energy. The other, shorter, more deliberate, gesturing commands. They were pouring liquid from a container. I watched the footage repeatedly. I recognized the controlled stillness of Vivian's composure and the nervous tension Derek Trevor had shown at the hearing. I spent the following week searching public records and found it. Sterling and Associates contracted with Crestview Holdings for $180,000 over 3 years for owner negotiations in the corridor. Vivian was receiving direct payments from the developer. I contacted Sarah Chun, my legal aide, who put me in touch with Paul Rise, a former forensic analyst. Paul successfully reconstructed the corrupted footage. The enhanced footage showed Trevor Hayes' lanky frame and Vivian Sterling's silver blonde hair. The critical detail came at timestamp 1:52 a.m. Trevor stumbled, and something fell from his jacket pocket, an access card, the rectangular type used for electronic building entry. Paul had isolated the frame and determined the card would have been shielded from the direct flame. I drove back to my property with a borrowed metal detector. The detector signaled, and near the northeast corner, partially buried under collapsed siding, the access card lay exactly where Paul's footage suggested. Heat had blackened and curled its edges, but the serial number was partially legible. I delivered the card and the enhanced footage directly to Roger Finch. This stops being a fire inspection and becomes an arson case with named persons of interest, Roger said. The community had been shifting. Martha Jennings had told her story, unlocking a pattern of grievances. Walter Briggs organized a phone tree, and over 40 households committed to attending an emergency community meeting. I contacted Diana Cole, a local television reporter who had been tracking HOA corruption. She agreed to attend the emergency meeting with a camera crew. The county district attorney announced a formal criminal investigation: arson, insurance fraud, and financial misconduct. The pressure was immense. Trevor Hayes' SUV disappeared from his driveway. Vivian was alone. Cornered animals fight hardest. 3 residents who had spoken publicly against Vivian received anonymous letters containing private information, financial difficulties, medical conditions, a clear threat. Walter Briggs' response: "She doesn't understand that intimidation only works when people are alone. We're not alone anymore." Trevor Hayes' escape lasted exactly 6 days. State police located him at a motel in Arizona. He quickly negotiated a cooperation agreement, reducing his exposure to 8 to 12 years in exchange for full disclosure about the planning and execution of the fire, the financial arrangements with Crestview Holdings, and the systematic targeting of property owners. Vivian suddenly faced a co-conspirator willing to explain exactly how her machine had operated. The investigation expanded, and 7 former property owners contacted investigators, describing experiences identical to mine. The emergency community meeting Walter Briggs organized drew over 100 residents. Walter immediately moved to a vote of no confidence, which passed with 87% support. They voted to suspend all pending violation enforcement, freezing the liens against my property. Vivian attended the meeting, sitting alone in the back row. When Walter opened the floor, she walked to the microphone, her polished composure fracturing visibly. "Before you rush to judgment," she said, "you should know that I have information about many people in this room. Private information, things you wouldn't want made public." The room went silent. Martha Jennings spoke without standing. "This isn't leadership, Vivian. This is panic." Then, I connected my laptop. The enhanced footage played without narration. Timestamp 1:47 a.m. 2 figures approaching the barn. The accelerant. The flames. The enhanced frame showing the shorter figure's profile. The tight bun of silver blonde hair unmistakable. The partial license plate matching Trevor's registration. The access card tumbling from a pocket. 47 seconds of evidence. The footage ended. Vivian stood slowly, pulling free from her attorney's grip. "You don't understand what I did for this community," she shouted, the control completely gone. Property values were declining. Meridian offered investment. All I had to do was remove the obstacles. Your farm was in the way. The side door opened, and 2 sheriff's deputies entered. The DA had authorized the arrest warrant that morning. Her confession, captured by Diana Cole's cameras and witnessed by over 100 residents, was more than enough. The lead deputy read the charges. "Vivian Sterling, you are under arrest for arson in the 1st degree, insurance fraud, racketeering, and wire fraud." 6 months passed. Spring arrived, and the Community Rebuilding Fund, financed by recovered HOA assets and contributions, covered the construction of my new, fire-resistant barn. Vivian Sterling's trial concluded in early March. The federal prosecutor presented evidence, filling 3 days of testimony. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 18 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 12. Trevor Hayes received 8 years. Crestview Holdings settled the civil lawsuit filed by the 8 affected families for $3.2 million. My share came to $420,000. The HOA underwent a complete transformation. Walter Briggs was elected president by unanimous vote. Martha Jennings volunteered to attend every board meeting as an unofficial observer, her notebook always open. She had learned that vigilance was the price of honest governance. The Remington 870 still hangs on the wall of my new barn, mounted above the entrance. The frame is warped from heat exposure, the trail camera still attached to the barrel, the device that captured 47 seconds of the truth. Below the gun, a simple brass plaque reads, "The truth never burns." I walk my property every morning now. I fought because surrendering would have meant accepting that people like Veronica/Vivian could destroy lives without consequence. The victory wasn't mine alone. It belonged to Martha, who spoke up, to Walter, who organized the resistance. The strongest weapon I ever carried wasn't the gun itself. It was the evidence that the gun recorded and the courage to use it when the moment finally came. If you've ever felt powerless against an HOA that abuses its authority, remember this. The truth survives when you refuse to let it die. Comment below and share your HOA drama. Hit that like button if you think justice was served, and please subscribe for more stories about homeowners who fought back and won.